Amen. Alrighty. Let's begin as we have the last couple of classes on the Sermon on the Mount. We're not reading all of the text of all four Gospels in this class, but this is one that bears reading aloud, so we're going to do that once again this morning. Probably won't do that in the accounts coming up just because there's so many of them. But Matthew 7, if we could get a volunteer down to verse 6, and then 7 to 11, and then we'll take a break after verse 12. Okay, so 1 to 6, Ryan, you'll have that one, and then be looking for another person to start at verse 7. All right?
Judge not that you not be judged. For with judgment you pronounce, you will be judged, and with the measure that you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you see that speck in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye when there is a log in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly enough to take the speck out of your brother's. Do not give dogs what is holy, and do not throw your pearls before swine, lest they trample them underfoot and turn to attack them.
Okay, very good. Verses 7 through 12, volunteer number 2. David, go ahead.
Keep asking, and it will be given unto you. Keep searching, and you will find. Keep knocking, and the door will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who searches finds, and to the one who knocks the door will be opened. What man among you, if his son asks him for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? If you then, who are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good things to those who ask him? Therefore, whatever you want others to do for you, do also the same for them. This is the law and the prophets.
Okay, very good. Thank you both. What commonalities or what things do you find that all four of these things share? And by four, I think there are 4 things going on here. There is the section on judgment, right, from 1 to 5. I think 6 is connected in that it's an application of judgment, right? It's sort of a different topic, but it's in the same vein of you have to be able to tell things about people and then make judgments on, or make decisions based on that, right? So verse 6 is sort of an application. And then 7 through 11 seems like the greatest blank check in history, but we're going to talk about what it actually means. And then verse 12 is sort of a summary. What do they all sort of have in common, you think? First of all. And the reason why I ask that question is because the rest of the Sermon on the Mount does that. There are sections that have things in common. There are the Beatitude sections, blessed are those, right? There is the section in chapter 5, you've heard that it was said, and I say to you. And then in chapter 6, you get teachings on hypocrisy. And what do you trust in, the end of the chapter? What do these have in common?
Well, first and foremost, it's telling us to do it. It's direction for us, all of that.
Okay, that is a good point.
We need to do. We need to understand. And you know, I was thinking when you were saying there were 4 things, I might add a 5th, the introspection that's required for us in the inspecting our beam in our eye. And that sort of thing. It might be, I mean, it's just an aside, but
True.
these are things we are told to do or not to do, but it requires action on our part.
Yeah, so kind of taking that in pieces, there are a lot of imperatives. There are a lot of commands in this section. That's not new for the sermon, right? We're told in 6 and verse 1, beware of practicing your righteousness. That's a command, right? This is something you have to do. Verse 16, when you fast, do not look gloomy. That's an imperative statement. And you get several of those in this section, chapter 7. Judge not, right? Verse 1. Verse 6, do not give dogs what is holy. Verse 7, ask and it will be given to you. You know, verse 12, whatever you want other people to do to you, do that to them. I'm paraphrasing that, right? So lots of sort of commandy type things, right? These are things you should be doing, right? What else? Oh, they're having a conversation. All right. So a couple things just to notice, right? We're going to talk the section about 1 through 5 about judging, right? If you take verse 1 by itself, nobody can tell anybody what to do about anything. Because that means, well, you're judging me. Okay, all right. What is he actually talking about? All right, it's not about the whether or not one should judge. It's about what R.T. France called reciprocity. right? The fact that you're doing to others what you've done to yourself, which is interesting, right? 1 through 5 is sort of a make sure you're doing to other people what you want done to yourself in terms of judgment. And then verse 12 is almost a summary of that. In everything you do, make sure that what you're doing to others is what you would want to have done to yourself, right? Like I mentioned, verse 6, it's not really a discussion about dogs and pigs, right? Pigs are delicious and dogs are friendly, most of them. It's a type of person, it's an attitude that people have that Jesus is telling them to be wary about. Verse 6 requires the judgment in verses 1 through 5. You can't say, well, I can't judge anything about you, so here are my pearls and here's my precious things, right? There's an application, yeah.
One of the other commonalities I really didn't think about until we were just going through this, it tells you what to do, and it also tells you the result, the expected result, which is kind of cool. Because it reinforces, if you do this, this will happen.
Then this will happen.
Yeah.
And that's something we saw in chapter 6, right? Your Father who sees in secret will reward you, which is sort of that sort of just gets said 3 times, just sort of here's the result of it. But you're absolutely right. Chapter 7 is full of conclusions or outcomes, right? If you throw your pearls before pigs, they're going to trample them, right? If you throw your holy things before dogs, they're going to attack you. If you ask and seek and knock, you're going to, of course, acquire those things. Yeah.
And he's pointing out indirectly, Jesus is also pointing out the danger of, if you're passing judgment on all these little matters, you're missing the bigger judgments here of the dogs and the pigs, you know, that will have a far more profound influence on your life than whether somebody does the littlest thing just the way that you believe it should be done. That's the beam and the mote, the idea there, you know, that
Magnifying so much on another person's dust, while we shouldn't be okay with dust, we also must recognize it can become something that clouds your own vision, right? It can become the log in your own eye. Like I said, 7:11 seems like a blank check, but it's not, because verse 11 explains why Jesus says what he says in verse 7. And then, like I said, in verse 12, we call this the golden rule. Whatever you wish others would do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets, right? There are, of course, limits to this. This is sort of like the Proverbs. It's a general truth, not a true in every situation imaginable, right? If you wish someone to give you a Ferrari, you should give them a Ferrari, right? That's what he said. That's not how it works, okay? It's a general truth, not a categorically, true thing all the time. All right. Questions. In the book, yeah, I'm rewriting a lot of the questions, so bear with me. If you went through and answered them, and if for no other reason that teachers, we look at questions and we say, okay, that's a yes/no question, right? Yes/no questions take no time. It's just true, false, done. We're trying to get over level 1, all right, with people. Verse 2, or question 2 says, why should we avoid judging others? Tell me what's the issue with the question, first of all.
It's an assumption that we are doing it.
Yeah, and it's an assumption that judging is bad, right?
Right.
Why should we avoid judging others? Well, we can't avoid judging others, right? It's part of what we have to do, right? So again, I think this is a better version of it. What is Jesus warning us about in 1 and 2? Because he says, judge not, that you be not judged, for with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged. With the measure you use, it'll be measured to you. Right, and then he goes into 3 with that. Yes, ma'am.
I think he's warning about setting ourselves to a different standard than everyone else, which would cause hypocrisy.
Okay. So it's an application of hypocrisy, right? If you set up other people to a standard you yourself are unwilling to follow, then it creates that disconnect, right? Did I see a wave?
I've got a note in John 7, he commands us to judge, but with righteous judgment. John 7:24.
Yeah, the problem in John 7 is that the Jews are not judging Jesus correctly. They're not judging him based on his actions and his words and his whatevers. They're judging him based on their own preconceived notions and things like that, right? So Jesus is saying in John 7 with regard to himself, don't judge like everyone else judge. Judge me righteously, right? Judge properly. So if he calls that to be done to himself, it can certainly imply that we're supposed to do that with other people. Yes?
I think it also makes a difference further down between righteous judgment and righteous indignation.
Okay.
And that we are to judge by the laws that we have been given, not the laws that we either choose to enforce or that are rules to us of conscience. Just because it doesn't say it's wrong, I wouldn't do it, but that doesn't mean I can judge you for doing it.
Yeah. So it's sort of like, between the lines, but it's what's the word I'm looking for? You got to be careful what standard you're using and make sure your standard is correct. Because at the end of the day, your standard will be the same as someone else's, and that's what God has given us, right? So long as we're holding to that, it will be all right. Yeah.
This made me think of 1 Corinthians 6. I'm trying to decide how much to read to give decent context. I'll read verses 1 through 4. If any of you has a legal dispute against another, do you dare go to court before the unrighteous and not before the saints? Or don't you know that the saints will judge the world? And if the world is judged by you, are you unworthy to judge the smallest cases? Don't you know that we will judge angels, not to mention ordinary matters? So if you have cases pertaining to this life, do you select those who have no standing in the church to judge? So, Paul here talks about judging a lot. The context, of course, is wanting to implore them not to litigate things in a secular court against each other rather than dealing with it internally. But I think it does a good job of pointing out a couple of things. One, that judgments are definitely necessary, as you've said already. And then two, he points out to illustrate that they have to make judgments, that the whole world and the angels are going to be judged by Christians. Now, when you look at other passages in greater context, he's talking about that by the light of Christians and the choices that we make to follow God, that is how the world and the angels, who either had the choice, in both cases, had the choice and chose not to follow God's instructions, that they will be judged
Bingo.
Based upon what we did choose when given that option.
Bingo. We don't sit as judges. We respond to the standard in the correct way, and in such we stand on the side of right, on the side of God, and in that sense we judge, all those who are around. And again, the idea is the standard. And if you're in 1 Corinthians, if you are going to be judged according to right and wrong, can you not figure out these little things among yourselves? Right? Why do you have to take those things before people that don't have any idea what right and wrong are? Relatively speaking, you should be above that, right? So yeah, in terms of judging, Jesus isn't categorically saying don't judge ever. That's foolish. He's saying the standard has to be the same between you and the person you judge. And secondly, you don't get to make that up. I don't get to say, well, I'm okay with it, and so therefore I don't judge you for it. That's never been the case, right? I've got a funny coming up in a minute. Yep.
I think this goes along too, if you back up to chapter 6, it talks about forgiveness, and understanding that we are forgiven based on how we forgive others, correct?
Exactly.
Hold him up, unmerciful servant is a prime example of how he was forgiven, but yet I hold my servant in a different standard, correct? So a lot of this reflection through the Sermon on the Mount, you'll get to see, especially at the end when he applies how we build our foundation. Everything is about doing, right? These people can hear the word, and how we can apply it to us is the same. We hear things, we know this scripture well, but how we apply it is a totally different realm, I guess. If we can't put it into practice, we're never going to make it there anyway.
It is totally different. It shouldn't be.
Yes.
Totally, right. It should be totally different. And this is just a comment on Bible study too. You mean reading into chapter 6 helps you understand chapter 7? Wow. Who'd have thunk it? Read around the verse and you'll get an idea of what he's talking about. That helps more often than it hurts. Again, the question out of the book, do you detect some humor? Do you?
Sure.
Great, let's move on. Now, what's the point of it? Right? Yeah, it's a little funny. Guy's got a log in his eye and a speck, and he's examining a speck in someone else's eye. There's lots of very funny art on the internet depicting that. I'm not going to subject you to it. What's the point of the illustration?
Well, oftentimes being over the top makes a point more effectively than straight up.
Sure.
You should not, look at your brother's sins, look at your own. That's not as compelling as the beam and the mote.
It's not as memorable, right?
It's a visual, really, it is.
Exactly right.
It's a speaking technique, obviously.
And it worked, it's an exaggeration for effect, right? That was his point. And his point was, be careful, if this were written in a later century, it might be people in glass houses don't throw stones, right? Or pot called the kettle black, or whatever it was. Those sorts of expressions. Same thing going on here. You hypocrite, take the log out of your own. Okay, how does verse 6 disprove the popular notion of you can't judge me, period? Just very simply, how does verse 6 address that? Just in context. Yep.
Because
Good.
You have to go through dogs and pigs.
Yeah, sometimes you gotta recognize, you're putting your holy things or your precious things before dogs and pigs. That requires a judgment based on the person and what they're doing and their attitude, right? It requires judgment. So judge not doesn't work. Yep.
And the other part of verse 1, the other flip side of that too, the other response is, you know what, if you're saying you're judging me and I'm telling you this is what the verse says, am I judging? That's the other part of it. If I stick to saying this is what Scripture says about the matter, and if that happens to apply to the circumstance that's at hand, I'm not judging, I'm simply pointing out this is what God has said about the matter.
There's a reason why we have the expression, don't shoot the messenger. He's much more easy to hit than where it came from, right? Now, how does verse 12 help us answer the question? Someone says, the Bible says you can't judge me. How can we take verse 12 and make a good response to it, right? Because John 7 is not the only response, right? Judge with righteous judgment. There are other, I would argue, better answers to the question, to the statement. Yeah.
It seems like the most important thing here is that the judgment should start with us.
Sure.
And that, so if we're doing that for ourselves, then we're going to be better able to help others. And that's the real purpose.
Yeah. Whatever you wish that others would do to you. That means you've got to make a decision. What would I rather people do to me? Well, I'd rather people be honest and, not take my things and treat me with respect and, give me a chance in a conversation and don't take me. You have to make calls, qualitative calls based on what people are doing and then say, okay, now I need to do that to other people. Judge not says, well, don't even do that, right? Now, how about verse 16? We haven't gotten to verse 16 in our reading, but I think it fits. When the discussion begins about false prophets, Jesus says in verse 16, you will recognize them by their fruits. You're going to be able to make value arguments, and not value, but right or wrong based on a false prophet's what they do. If you're not allowed to judge, then you're not allowed to examine whether or not someone's a false prophet. Well, I can't judge them. Right? It doesn't work. Yeah.
Conversely, would they do the same to us?
Sure.
Our actions will tell them what kind of people we are.
Sure. So I found this years ago. This was in 2016. Babylon Bee. All right. If you've ever read it, most of it's kind of funny. It's satire for one. So get that out there. This is not an actual news article out of a quote-unquote reputable news source. But the headline goes, woman uses airtight judge not defense to beat murder case. Right? Towards the middle of the article, the attorney's making, saying, we saw your neighbor scream out. We saw you at the scene putting his body in a dumpster. Is that true? And then she says, in the words of Jesus, judge not. The courtroom interrupts, and she's asked to explain her answer. She says, sure, judge not. None of you hypocrites have the right to judge me for my actions on the night in question. Only God can judge me. The district attorney slumps in his chair because the trial's all but over. You get it, right? It's not, it's ridiculous to say something like that, right? This was in R.T. Francis' commentary on Matthew. And I thought it just a good way of summarizing the error of that. He said, the critic who is blind to their own failings is living in a make-believe world where no one can exempt oneself from standards to which others are expected to perform. Right? If you're going around saying, you know, you can't judge me, in essence, you're living in a fantasy land where you get to be in a different set of standards than everyone else. That's just not the case. Right? We need to call back to reality. All right.
This is, I mean, we've hit on, frankly, the reason why most people, if they be honest, reject the fact that there is a God, is they don't want to be judged.
If you admit a God, you admit someone above you who gets to say what you need to do and what you have to do. And that, you know, when I get to be God, it's much easier to go through life, right? Because then I get to make all the decisions. But I didn't create myself, so there's that, right? Okay, what do dogs and pigs have in common? Why were they instructed to keep the holy and valuable things away from them? What do dogs and pigs have in common? And why does Jesus use those two things, those two creatures? What's that? One, they're unclean, right?
Two, they place no value on anything. Nothing is valuable.
Nope.
Except
Nope. You throw a diamond ring and a dirty sock in a pig pen, and it will lay on both of them because it doesn't care. I mean, it doesn't know. It doesn't recognize that some things are more valuable and some things are less. It's ignorant in that sense. Yep.
The other thing I think about was swine. You clean them up, and boom, they're back in the mud, wallowing.
Yeah. Dogs are going to eat filthy things because that's what dogs do. Pigs are going to lay in filth because that's what they do, right? We have an expression like a pig in filth because that's just as happy as it can be, right? Now, what kind of person is this describing? Because Jesus is, I mean, Jews are already supposed to stay away from pigs, so he's not being literal. What kind of people is he describing here? What sort of people is Jesus describing here? Yeah.
Well, to some degree, he's describing ignorant people because
Okay.
they're unaware of the value of the wisdom of God, for sake of discussion here, we're talking about. They don't appreciate, don't understand it, so they're truly ignorant of it, and they also may be totally uncaring about it, which is another issue. That's an internal heart thing.
Yeah. Ignorance has some level of innocence to it. I think this goes beyond ignorance,
Well, you can have willful ignorance.
right? Mark, did you have a thought?
I was going to say, the old literary description, people of the baser sort was the old description they used to use to describe it. People who are only looking out for themselves, they live for the moment, they don't care what you have to say, they see no value or relevance in what you have to say.
Yeah.
And therefore, they have no, if you will, they have no respect for the person delivering the message either because they have no respect for the message.
Yeah. Jesus cannot be describing just the ignorant, they just don't know, right? Because there's an obvious problem with that. What is it? How then are you ever going to teach that person the gospel?
And that's
Right? Well, you just don't know, so you're ignorant. Well, you got to go teach them, right? Yeah.
I mean, I think based on the context, he's describing this brother who is looking at his other brother with a problem that's tiny while he has a huge log in his eye. I mean, so someone who can't see, can't judge themselves and where they actually are accurate,
Or refuses to.
or refuses to, yeah.
Right. Refuses to. Did you have a thought?
I thought we all have, I mean, we know people who have taken things that should be important and things that should matter, not stuff, but your wedding vow. Those are matter, those are serious, those are important, and we all know people that have treated them like they're worthless. And I think that's the idea here. These are people who just don't care that something should truly matter.
They know,
Yeah.
they don't care.
Yeah.
You have to think too, look at the crowd that Jesus is talking to. These are ignorant people.
Mm-hmm.
These are people who are coming to him because they have not heard this or they do not understand this. He's
Right.
not going to refer to them as dogs and pigs.
Bingo.
Okay? He is talking about these hypocrites. And ideally, that's what we just talked about, right?
Mhm.
So we're looking at these people who do know what's going on, who still can't apply, who can't do what I've told them. They know these scriptures, but they do not hold them. Their hearts are far from me, right? Their lips
Right.
praise me, but their hearts are far from me.
Willfully
All about
so.
application.
You're absolutely, the willful, right? The ones who reject and refuse to hear it. Later on, Jesus referred to the hypocritical Pharisees as, vipers and, whitewashed tombs and other expressions, right? He's not talking about just the general, we don't know better, right? There is a need to be able to recognize the difference between people. And some people are to be treated according to how they've decided to be, not what they know, right? The ignorant are always to be taught. The ignorant are never to be referred to as dogs and pigs. It's the hostile that I think he's referring to here. Those who know, but they have no desire to turn or no desire to change. Okay, in 7:11, wow, I almost got out of time. Jesus said, ask and seek and knock. My question is, for what? Because he says, ask and it'll be given, seek and you'll find, knock and it'll be opened. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and the one who knocks it will be opened. Again, sounds like the greatest blank check in history. So my question is, for what?
You have to connect it with the next verses, which is, to me, a bit of a jump in a way, is because ask and seek and knock is connected with what father would give his child a stone if he asked for a fish. Those two are connected. So he's talking about seeking things, I believe, of God, because he's talking about what would God give you a stone if you asked for a fish?
Okay.
What kind of father would do that? So he's talking about a father here in reference, and it must be his father.
Okay. Other thoughts? Yeah.
The knowledge to judge ourselves righteously and to understand what he does want from us.
Okay. So maybe like a specific application of what you saw above, right? That would be something, the asking and seeking and so on. Bob?
In this context, we're seeking the truth. In this context, we're seeking God's truth, and we're pursuing it. If we seek it, we'll find it. We must diligently seek it. But the knocking goes beyond that. It takes an active pursuit of it, and ultimately, we're seeking salvation.
There's a bit of a progression, right? There's asking, and then there's looking for, and then it's like, well, you asked where it was, and then you sought where it was, and then you get there and you knock, right? So there's a little bit of a story being told there, okay? For what's being asked for, you have to go, as he said, further into the text. Which one of you, if his son asks him for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for fish, will give him a serpent? If you then, who are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children. Jesus just called all of them evil. How could he do such a thing? What is he doing? It's not categorically evil, it's comparison, right? By comparison to God, yeah, we're on the other side, okay? If you then who are evil know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who's in heaven give good things to those who ask him? So back to my question. He said, ask and seek and knock for what? Good things. All right. Now what are those?
Unless you want big things.
Okay. How do we determine what good things are? Yes, sir, Ryan. And then Julie.
Tie this into John 15, when he talks about it. He is the vine. If we abide in him and he abides in us, we can ask for anything. Why? Because I'm not going to ask for a Ferrari or a Maserati if I am abiding in him, right? I'm looking for the things of the good things, the things that are above, right? That's where my mind is. That's where my heart is, on the things above. So I'm going to be asking for, give me the peace that I need, to endure whatever storm this is. Give me the wisdom to make this decision. Give me you see what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
our minds are in tune with what his mind is when our heart's in the right place.
That's a good point. It's like, well, what are we then going to be asking for?
Not
Well,
things.
we're not going to ask for foreign cars. We're going to ask for domestic, right? Chevy.
Yeah.
No, that's not the point. Those who are seeking God are going to ask for the things God gives, right? All right. God can give any number of things that we would all consider good. why then does he not give us all that we ask, even when we ask for things that are good? Let's say we are in the process and we ask God for something that is good, for something that God gives, for something that's, good in the context that we're asking for it. Have you ever asked for something good from God and not get it? So then my question is why?
The easiest answer is we determine it's not what we need. God, we're told in the scriptures, God knows what we need before we ask. So, and sometimes, quite frankly, no is the right answer. Because we think we want something, and it's not what's best for us.
Yeah.
In his wisdom, he knows what we need before we ask.
Yeah. Yep. And then here. Yeah.
Well, what I think of here and what you ask for when you look at everything, here Jesus is teaching them his word. And, John 14, in there he says, if you love me, keep my commandments. And we're going to see that basically he's going to get on down and what do you build on? What do you build on, the rock or the sand? Well, it's his words and his teaching. So to me, when it says ask, if you're really seeking his way, his will, you ask, and if you're open-hearted and listen to his teachings, you're going to find the way.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I think.
Maggie, did you have a thought?
Yeah, I think also this concept is an opportunity for us to display our faith. If we're willing to ask or seek or knock, and then even if we're not given the answer that we're looking for, that's still, us being content with that is still displaying our faith. Knowing that he knows, first of all, he knows, us knowing that, we're able to ask for something, but then following that, depending on the answer we receive, we have faith that he knows what's best for us and we're okay with that.
Yeah. It's an act of faith from the beginning and to the end, right? What are we asking for? If we're doing what the end of chapter 6 says, seeking first his kingdom and his righteousness, that's where we're going for. That's what our mind's focused on. And then you mentioned the end of that decision. When we ask for things that we see in our moment that are good and he says no, we have to trust, okay, he knows better. And he does. And we have to be okay with that. Kendrick and then David.
It's interesting too, as we grow in our faith as a Christian, that our ask, seek, and knock looks different, right? As a child, you ask for candy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, right? As a child, you ask for, fill in the blank, because it's good and it's fun and it tastes good and it makes me feel good and makes me happy, that sort of thing, right? As you grow in your faith and mature in that faith, you don't ask for candy, you ask for something that is going to nourish what needs nourished. You ask for the guidance, right? And so I think it's also a good example and a good reflection for us to ask ourselves right now, how are we, what are we asking, how are we seeking, and are we truly knocking on that?
Yeah. Are those things we're asking for in alignment with what he wants? Right? The Christian ultimately, that's their goal. That's what they're working towards. There's a good, I think, version of this towards the end of 1 John. 1 John 5, verse 14. He says, this is the confidence that we have toward him, speaking of God. If we ask anything according to his will, he hears us. And if we know that he hears us in whatever we ask, we know that we have the request that we've asked of him. John's not saying, well, whatever we ask for, we're going to get. He's saying if we ask for things that are God's will, they will happen. Right? There's an alignment with him process that goes on in this asking and seeking. It's like, that's the way prayer works. All right, one more and then I got to move it on.
Another thing, too, everything you've said is exactly right. But also, it might be in due time. We have to learn patience also.
Sure.
So,
Sure. The Father knows not only what good gift to give, but when.
maybe something good for us, but it's not for now.
True.
It's for later.
Very true. Okay, I got to get this last bit, and then we'll go from there. Let's read it. I'm not going to apologize for reading. 13 and 14, if someone would read that, and then 15 to 20, and then 21 to 23. So one of the three, right? 2 verses, beginning of verse 13. Rack in the back. Sean's got 13 and 14.
Enter by the narrow gate, for wide is the gate, and broad is the way that leads to destruction. There are many who go in by it. Because narrow is the gate, and difficult is the way which leads to life, and there are few who find it.
Okay, 15 to 20. Go ahead.
Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will recognize them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorn bushes, or figs from thistles? So every healthy tree bears good fruit, but the diseased tree bears bad fruit. A healthy tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a diseased tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus you will recognize them by their fruits.
Okay, 21 to 23. Volunteer number 3, Kendrick.
Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father in heaven. On that day many will say to me, Lord, Lord, didn't we prophesy in your name, drive out demons in your name, and do many miracles in your name? Then I will announce to them, I never knew you, depart from me, you lawbreakers.
Okay, Bob, if you'll get the last section.
What do we got?
24 to 27.
Everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like the wise man who built his house on the rock, and then the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on the house, but it did not fall, because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand, and the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew, and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it.
Okay, we're going to hold verse 28 for just a second. What do those 4 texts have in common? What's that?
There's only one way.
Okay, there's only one way. That's one thing they have in common. What else? All 4 of those stories do something similar. What is it? Well, maybe more than one thing. Like, there, you got 5 minutes. What do they all have in common? All right, so if there's one way, then all 4 stories also tell you the other.
The wrong way.
There's 2 paths, right? And only one of them is preferable, right? In all 4 accounts, when you think about it like that, there's the wide and the narrow way. There's the false prophet and his way versus the good tree and the good fruit, the good way, right? There is those who say to me, Lord, Lord, they're not getting in, but those who do the will of the Father, that's the other path. And then obviously the wise man and the foolish man building houses on different foundations. What else do they all have in common? There's 2 paths, one of them is good, the other one bad. What else? Yeah.
The good path is the one very few follow.
Okay.
And numerically, most people are not following the good path.
All right. So you can sort of see that thread runs through a little bit, maybe thinner in some places than others, but obviously in the first story, the narrow gate's harder to get to, fewer people find that. Beware of false prophets gives you the implication that there's going to be lots of them, right? This isn't, beware of the one, beware of all of them. And then many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord. So there's this thread of most people sort of find the wrong way, all right? Yeah.
All these involve choice. So
Mhm.
you have to choose. Jesus doesn't tell you which one you are in this wise or foolish. You have to choose based on his assessment of what is wise, what is foolish. Where
Yep.
do you fall into that category?
Absolutely. There's a choice to be made. All 4 events deal with what? Oh, sorry, you say something else.
What's interesting too is they all involve work by the individual.
Okay.
Task, right? They walk down this path, they build this house, they gather this fruit. Your labor, your fruit shows which path.
Yep. It's a product of what you do, and you choose actively one of these 2 paths, right? The big one I like too, they all are talking about judgment in some sense. They all involve a final outcome for whatever path you chose, and that outcome that moment we call judgment or judgment day, right? And they all sort of carry that theme. The wide and the easy path leads to destruction. The narrow, difficult path leads to life. The false prophets will be thrown into the fire. That means there are some that are going to be destroyed and some that are going to be spared. Right? You'll know them by their fruits. The good tree and the good fruits, they're not going to be cast into the fire. If you fail to do God's will, you're not going into the kingdom of heaven. Period. Right? Even though you give many reasons why you should, it's still the people who do the will of the Father. And then Jesus did something very interesting between the third and fourth stories. In 21 to 23, he says, everyone who does the will of my Father won't enter the kingdom. And then in 12 and following, he says, those, or not 12, I have the wrong verses on there, my apologies. 24 and following, he says, those who hear the words of mine and do them. Don't miss that he just talked about those who do the will of my Father and then the people who listen to what I'm telling them, right? Don't miss that segue from one to the next. Bob and then Kendrick.
You called the seek, find, and knock a
Yeah.
progression. Well, these are continuations of those progressions if you really look at it.
It kind of is, yeah.
It really makes a lot of sense, and even to the point where the narrow path, we know it's a progression the rest of our life. It's something we must follow the rest of our life. But I never looked at it that way, but it kind of flows that way.
It does. Yeah, I love it because it's just another great example of read them together, read all the stories together, you know, kind of the way they were given. Because you start to see that it's not just an account.
There's patterns.
There's flow to it, and they connect, and one informs you on the next, right? Which is what good teaching should do. It should flow one to the thing. Okay, we got a few of these principles from the wide and narrow gates, right? I was going to ask you for 5 of them, but again, we're running a little short on time. In the false prophet section, Jesus said we would recognize false prophets by their fruits. So my question is, what are the fruits? He doesn't say in the text what the fruits are. He just, I guess, assumes that we would know what they are. So, what are they?
Teaching error.
Okay, what they say, right? What else? Or
Yeah, and actually, that's what I was going to talk about. It's interesting on this that they are saying they're doing it in the Lord's name, right? And so when we talk about this wide path, we talk about the fruit. Well, what was the heart behind what they were doing and what they were teaching? Was it to get as many people as they could, so they were a little more lax on music, they were a little more lax on marriage divorce, they were a little more lax, not so, they were more socially acceptable. Right? God knows the core of that. So while we may sit here with our group of 100 and somebody is sitting with a group of thousands, it's more of where's the heart, where's the context, where's the truth.
Yeah.
And it's hard to find again.
And the truth's not found in how many people believe it. The truth's not found in intentions. It's found in alignment with God's will and heeding the words of Jesus. It's no wonder they get to the end and they're just blown away by this. They're like, what? It's almost like I can't believe he said that. Because he didn't say it like the teachers of the law did. He said it like, I'm the one telling you. And that's a different animal. Last thought.
The fruits of the false prophet are where the teaching will lead you.
Yeah.
Nothing can be clearer. Hey, here are 87. Take the doctrine and take it where it leads you, and you see that it's death.
Fine. Follow the trail, see where it leads. All right. As always, not even close, but we tried. I am going to press on in lesson 11. We're going to do the first half of it. So if you're following along in the book, we're going to do the healing of the centurion's son and the raising of the widow's son, and then the sermon about John the baptizer. So we'll do basically the first half of lesson 11, not Sunday, but next Sunday. All right, Lord willing. So, all right, thank you guys. Appreciate your comments this morning. Had a lot of good discussion today.